So welcome to our second workshop for this block. I've got here with me Carri Munn. She's a partner at Converge, and what we're going to be doing for the next 80 minutes is we're going to be spending time in an interactive session together, all looking at how to understand, assess, and track the health of your network or other decentralized group. So a little bit about Carri before we dive in. She's a partner at Converge, a network of consultants dedicated to cultivating impact networks and the capacity of network coordinators, something we've spoken about a lot this week already. She works with networks globally and co-facilitates Converge's Network Leadership Series. Carri's home place is in Portland, Oregon, the Cascadia bioregion, where she's out and about mothering, dancing, cooking, and hiking. The session is going to be an interactive one, and it's going to be about demystifying what a healthy network is and how DIY evaluation can help coordinators amplify our collaborative potential. Welcome, Carri. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm excited that you all chose to spend some time here learning and sharing about this. I want to get us started by sharing a few intentions about what brings me here, and then invite you to do the same. So one intention I have is to help demystify what a healthy network is and how evaluation can help us get there. So my hope is that we learn about how network evaluation can support network coordination. And all of us leave with a few ideas about, the next 1 or 2 steps that we can take to advance this and tell better stories about what progress looks like when we're collaborating. And another intention today is to share what we at Converge are practicing and experimenting with, so that we can also help one another change how we change the world. I love that theme that is here with us over these past 4 days. So, evaluation in a network context seems relatively new. How are we measuring what matters in relational work that seeks to generate emergent outcomes, right? It's one thing to measure things when you think you know what they are in advance. It's a completely different thing to measure what you don't know is coming. So that's the conversation that I want to have today and invite us into. And I hope we'll be gaining a shared sense of what lies at the intersection of emerging theory and what we all are practicing. And this is often what we refer to at Converge as current best thinking. So I want to share what that is, coming from all directions to improve how we're coordinating purposeful work. So I want to just invite you all into the chat. What drew you here? Are you practicing evaluation already? Is it something you've been experimenting with? Do you want to learn something about something you know nothing about yet? Where are we as a group, and where are your interests? Because I want to be able to speak to as many of them as I can as we go through our session today. And if you want to jump in and you prefer to use your voice instead of your fingers, feel free to come off mute and share a thing or two about why you're spending your time with us today.
Hi there, I'm happy to start. I'm Jody. Hi, everybody. I'm in Miami. It's 5:30 at night here. I'm the founding president of the Value Web, a community that's almost 20 years old. And we have reached a big block of engagement and people wanting to step up to be on the board. And we're kind of lost for going to our next model. So I'm curious to hear about some other long-term communities that maybe need to hit the reset button and some ideas that you have. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I see processes optimizing work and self-managing organizations. Yes. And I appreciate the comment from Malcolm about not knowing anything about evaluation. I've known a little bit, and my colleague Kelly Jarvis has helped me learn a whole lot more. And so there are some things that are very intuitive, and there are other things that make a lot of sense once you're introduced to them, but you may not know at the beginning. The correlation between network health and the impact we're having. Well, that, Pippa, thanks for that. That is definitely one of the places that we're going to go. All right. Well, to get us started, I want to pop us into breakout groups and get you all talking to one another. And the first conversation that I'm curious about is, what data do you collect about your network or collaboration, and what are you doing with it? And maybe, if you don't have a lot of data, what do you wish you could show with data if you had it? So we're going to have 10 minutes in some breakout rooms before we come back and share a little bit. We want to get us talking to one another. So I see that in the chat with the star. So you all be in groups of 3, and we'll see you back here in a minute.
All right, sending you off.
I want you to know that there's a lot more nuance and depth, and we're gonna go through the territory and hopefully illuminate places that you want to stop and stay longer. But welcome back. And I'm curious, what are some of the things that showed up in terms of the data that you're collecting and what you're doing with it, or data that you want to collect and be able to use to tell stories about the progress of your work? So feel free to drop things in chat. Feel free to jump off mic and share a thing or two about your conversation.
One of the topics that we focused on was this perception of value, because it's so much about the health of a network is sometimes around this sense of, I'm getting value here. I'm seeing value emerge from what I'm doing, and my contributions are creating value, and just exploring a little bit about how can you capture or be able to assess how much value are we, what's the perception of value? How much value are we bringing?
That's a good one, and we will talk about that. What else?
I think our group, we had people at different journeys, I guess. Some people were very much at the start. They didn't know where to start. They had a very sort of small co-op. Then others that were almost kind of disenfranchised, like tried to do some meaningful kind of evaluation. But yeah, I guess a bit disengaged, and having a bit of a hiatus. And then I'm curious about, as I said in the chat, like the connection between working in a network distributed way and that correlation with the impact, like what it is that makes that way of working different and impactful. And yeah, apologies, my internet's a bit dodgy. I'll stop talking.
Anyone want to share one more before we dive in? Thank you for that, Pippa.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's helpful just opening up the subject, because I realize I've done some form like testing and metrics like in relation to specific goals that we have as a network, but I don't even know how to think about how do we assess the health of the network, so that there's a big enough gap to where I wouldn't know how to set even goals around that. So I feel, that's what's stirring for me right now.
So what Sean was saying also, it reminds me the topic that we were touching, and that's, as Abby put it, it is not only about minds, but also in hearts, especially in impact networks. Yeah, so this is kind of measuring emotions. That is the hard topic that probably many of us are interested in.
Oh, that, Chris, you're speaking to a topic that is also near and dear to my heart, is how do we get closer to being able to measure the feeling of the experience of being in a network and correlating that with value. yeah, I think that's a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to start to do a little bit of this demystifying. But before that, I want to just make a couple of notes about language. So, I'm used to using the word network because Converge consults with networks or network approaches to collaboration. And an impact network, in the way that we think about it, is a group of people who are intentional and strategic about the way that they learn and act and collaborate to shape and transform systems. So the systemic or the large scale collaborative changes is the focus. But I also want to recognize that people gather around shared purpose in many different ways to accomplish things together that they can't do alone. So organizations, communities, co-ops, coalitions. So when I say the word network, if that's not what you're working with, apply it and imagine that I'm talking about relational ways of working and collaboration, and that you're included. And that, this evaluation about how healthy that network of relationships is, that's going to be our focus. So if working relationally is the way to get big things done that we can't do alone, then the health of those relationships is kind of what we're looking at. And I don't want us to get tripped up too much on the formality of one or more structures or the diverse ways that people organize. And then I'm going to be speaking, and this one's important because of the accessibility factor. A lot of what is being shared here is coming with the assumption or from the standpoint of the coordinator. So whoever is kind of leading, facilitating this effort, there are many different names for these roles, but the idea is, like Mel said in the introduction, that it's DIY. Like the person or team who's cultivating these relationships, we think is in a really good position to collect the data and to administer a couple of simple tools to capture more data and then make sense of it and use it primarily to advance the health of the network. So this is coming hopefully as something that you can say, oh, okay, maybe next week I try one or two things. So with that, I am going to share my screen and start sharing with you some images and a couple of stories. So here we are. And I'm just going to start with a quick story to say that 2 years ago, my colleague Amelia Pape and I began working with a program called Alliances for Action at the UN's International Trade Center. And there were these two really passionate guys from Argentina, and they're dedicated to living incomes for small-scale farmers. And they asked us to help them build out their network approach. So they were not yet a network, but they said, we think you've got tools and you can help us. And their purpose is creating equity and sustainability in global supply chains for coffee and cocoa and coconuts. So we were really inspired by this opportunity to help decolonize food systems and the simultaneous crazy challenge of fostering a network approach inside of what might arguably be the world's biggest bureaucracy. So we've been collaborating with this program for 2 years, and there's been a lot of innovation. And today, some of this current thinking on network evaluation that I want to pull back the curtains on a little bit and explore a little bit together, how we're looking at and evaluating the progress. It's coming from this context of experimentation. And so I just want to acknowledge our colleague, Kelly Jarvis, who helps us with this. She specializes in evaluation, and that this thinking has come from many members of Converge. We're also a network, who've helped to collaborate and develop these frameworks, but then also with our networks, our clients who ground truth the practices in their networks and on the ground. So why evaluate your network? There are many reasons. First and foremost, gathering input from participants about what's working or not for them. To, as we've been saying, assess the health, like identify areas of strength and places where additional support could help the network to thrive. To be able to focus your coordination efforts and prioritize when, where, and how you cultivate the network. To build capacity both for leadership in the network, but also to increase resources for things like infrastructure and projects. And then to communicate impact using data to tell the story of your work and your progress. So, questions about network impact are important, but impact at scale takes time. There are, emergent rather than predictable outcomes, and these kinds of things can be difficult to measure. So relational decentralized ways of working often move at the speed of trust. I think we've all been there, felt that. And, if we're doing this professionally, we're also, sort of hearing our funders asking, so how do I tell if that $100,000 investment was worth it? So it feels like, people are asking, how do you show progress with this network approach? And what signals or milestones are we even looking for? And some of those comments showed up in your chat. So if we're looking for signals of progress, I think one of the first things to have a grasp on is a sense of the process that we're participating in. So Converge created a general networks theory of change to describe how connecting, coordinating, and collaborating interact with one another to generate system-level impacts. And network coordinators, so the leaders, stewards, they go, like I said, by many different names and titles. These are the folks who are intentionally and strategically facilitating these activities as a kind of continuous process of cultivation. So a little bit more detail on what this looks like, with hopes that you can then explain, how does it work? What makes a network get to impact? So networks connect people around common purpose, and they build trust between the people so that people are openly sharing information. And that allows them to increase their collective understanding of the broader system that they're a part of. And then as awareness increases and information flow accelerates through the relationships, people can then begin coordinating the work that's already happening and supporting each other in ways that amplify that shared purpose. And over time, coordination becomes collaboration. Innovative ideas surface, people are piloting prototypes, they're learning, they're iterating together. And as those collaborations deepen, the system becomes more coherent. It's adaptive, it's intelligent collectively, what we call greater than the sum of its parts. So system level impacts emerge as a result of this ongoing connecting, coordinating, and collaborating. So we like to use the metaphor of a garden and say, similar to how a healthy garden produces a big harvest, a healthy network is capable of producing impacts across a complex system. So in a nutshell, healthy networks lead to positive intermediate outcomes for participants, so that value that we want to capture for the people participating, and then longer term to system impacts. So still there's this question, how can we understand if a network approach is working if we can't see the impact yet? So we assess the network health because it's what underlies that collective capacity to achieve whatever the purpose is that we're aiming for. And the focus of network evaluation for network coordinators is learning about what's happening in the network cultivation process in order to improve network health. So if what we're aiming for is something like this murmuration of starlings, something that's collective, intelligent, adaptive, resilient, an entity that's other than the sum of its parts, where do we begin? So these are the 4 domains that we look at, and they are kind of intersectional in their effects. And we say that a healthy network has robust collaborative infrastructure. So these are things like regular meetings and weaving calls, communication platforms, foundational agreements like the purpose, the principles, the decision-making methods. And we say that participant experience is important. So participants who have positive experiences engaging with the network, how do they feel and what is their experience? And healthy networks also have a high level of connectivity among the participants. And that is what's helping to generate emergent activities. So these are things like collaborative projects, partnerships, developing among the participants. So we might not be able to measure exactly what will emerge, but we can look at if it is emerging. And each of these domains has a respective tool that you can use to assess it. So the good news, like I've been saying, is that these are accessible ways of getting data about your network that will help you make wise decisions about how to foster health. So for each one, there's a primary data collection tool. So admin information is collected by coordinators, and there are spreadsheets for this. A participant experience survey will help you get a sense of, what are people experiencing? How are they finding value? Do they have a sense of trust? Things like that. Social network analysis helps to measure the degree to which people are connecting and sharing. I was a part of one that I took today, so it's fresh on my mind. And then what we call the collaborative activity dashboard, which is part of that same suite of spreadsheets as admin data, helps to track and measure, okay, what are the things that are emerging? Because they happen at disparate parts of the network, but when you are systematic about asking questions and collecting, well, what's happened as a result of you coming to these network gatherings? Oh, this, and this, and suddenly you have 50 things, and it looks more than a little bit random. So when you're synthesizing data across these 4 domains, they can give you a really good picture of network health. So you can see things like who's attending events and who isn't. And then you can cross-check that with information about their sense of clarity of purpose or the alignment with the work that they're doing in their day jobs or what they care about in their professional lives. And you can use that to help them get value out of the network. You can understand who's connected to whom, which highlights, as a coordinator, who you want to weave together or where you want to spend time communicating to inform people about opportunities to engage. You can identify people who are the most generative in the network, and you can uncover opportunities to support emerging ideas and partnerships that may be forming. And you can capture the multiple ways that people experience value so that you can communicate those intermediate outcomes. And where can you find these tools? Well, some of them I'm going to share with you. So I have a link at the end of the session that I can give you to a copy of this evaluation dashboard. And you can find a participant survey on Converge's website in our toolkit, where there are lots of other resources. And then the social network analysis, that actually you have to get on some platforms to do this, but it's also relatively inexpensive and simple to use some app to collect your data and Kumu to visualize the connections. So sounds like some of you have used, and I think that there's probably others. I'm looking at Travis's comment. So those are the basics for network health. But I want to take us back to the metaphor of the garden, and we see so many similarities in this metaphor with network cultivation. So in a garden, what do we think we need for a healthy harvest? Well, some really important things are rich soil, consistent water, and an attentive and experienced farmer. So for networks, through this process of working with the client that I mentioned, Alliances for Action, we surfaced 3 similar key conditions for network health. And we're in the process of kind of checking this out with people. So part of the reason why I'm sharing with you today is see what you think about this. So we've been thinking that these 3 key conditions are a strong narrative, a consistent flow of sufficient resources for the network, and a capable coordinator with capacity to facilitate these activities. So new thinking, and I'm going to share a little bit more about it so we can see how it resonates with y'all. So the narrative. Here we go. My slides are being a little bit wonky. So the patterns that we're looking for are patterns that are salutogenic, meaning that they foster network health. So what we found about a clear, compelling narrative is that it creates the context for our work. So for people to form a network, they need to understand what the purpose is. They need to understand, how do we come together here and create change? Because I have a vision and I think I belong here, but how are we going to do this? And they want to know what the network's role is and the coordinator's role and how they can engage. So the narrative helps them do that. The capable coordination is important because the coordinator is the one who's leading the cultivation of the network. So they are the ones that are developing and maintaining the collaborative infrastructure. They are engaging a lot with the participants and helping to play a key role in their experience. They're fostering connectivity by making introductions, and they're tracking the emergent activity and the network health. So we think that's a really important one. And then this last one, consistent flow of sufficient resources, we think is important because the resources affect the level of coordination support, the frequency with which you can afford to bring your people together, the quality of the infrastructure that you have, and this one's a little bit more subtle, but people's sense of longevity, like your ability to plan and the participant's sense of potential. Is this network going to be around for 3 months or 3 years? Because I might think differently about how I participate if I know that we've got funding in place. So our emergent thinking, we started with the center and now we've expanded out, is that all 7 of these domains provide a holistic view of network health and the key conditions that are influencing it. And as practitioners in this space, I'm really interested in how this resonates for you. So do these network health concepts help you think about how to evaluate and support your network or collaboration? So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can chat about it. So we're going to go back into some breakout groups for some digestion and reflection. And the invitation is to reflect on networks or collaborations that you've been a part of and share a story of success or a challenge in relation to one or more of those network health domains. So how might network health data help you maybe highlight a success and elevate it and share it more broadly? Or how might it help you address a challenge? So we're going to have 15 minutes this time to share stories. And then I look forward to someone from your group coming back and sharing a little bit about your conversation so that everybody in the room can benefit.
All right. Yep,
Go.
we're ready. All right, Richie.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Well, we are going to have a conversation about what we talked about, but the first invitation here is just to stretch. Take a deep breath, maybe stand up. You've been sitting in front of a screen. Sometimes I think we're all head and we forget to have movement in our bodies while we're interacting this way. Yeah. Oh. Well, you can keep up your stretching. You can do yoga while we have a debrief, whatever you want. but I do want to invite folks to share, what themes or insights came up in your group from your stories that other people here in the larger space would benefit from hearing. So welcome to put things in the chat. I'm one of the people who likes to formulate things as I type the words, sometimes more than I like to just come off the mic and speak, but both are welcome here. So what do you have to share? Who would like to get us started?
I can start if it's okay, Carri.
Sure.
So I was with Pippa and David, and we found ourselves migrating back to the dialogue we had at the Indigenous Ways and Worldviews. It was interesting. So we were talking about the notion of coordination, central coordination, and how important that was, and Pippa, please, sort of tell your story about that. But Pippa is serving that role, and I briefly related a situation I was in where that role was quite autocratic and wasn't encouraging the health of the network. And then we talked about possible alternative ways to deal with a non-hierarchical way of organizing a network, which, and I cited some examples of Indigenous groups that I had been associated with. So.
Wonderful. Yes, we're in the process of creating some blog post on network deal breakers, and that sort of autocratic approach is at the top of the list. What else? Was it easy for you all to connect or see, some of the successes you've had in relationship to network health, or some of the challenges in relationship to these ideas of network health? Are they helpful for you?
So I definitely appreciated even the very first slide and your explanation about how connections form to unearth information that isn't available everywhere. And then that information is used to coordinate action. Not that it applies to my particular case, because I think when I came, like, I have a network that is maybe like purposeless, but it's just like it comes from like an alumni group, or maybe we don't yet know what the purpose of it is. But I definitely appreciate this idea of, like, how the value gets formed and how the network extracts value, extracts in a good way, gets value out of its members through unearthing and sharing information that they can then coordinate around.
Mm-hmm. And we do see that networks sometimes have a purpose that is like at the surface, like very general. And then when that connecting starts to happen, they quickly zero in on, okay, this is actually why we're together. But we didn't have enough conversations to uncover it. Naeem, am I saying your name right?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. No, we were thinking about, it was kind of on the same theme that I think our group was thinking together. On the one hand, this idea of intermediate outcomes for the participants, and then systemic longer term impact that you were sharing about, and how to allow for the emergence of it to happen, and how that also reflects on the role of coordination, and then how we consider when certain things come in, like this idea of maybe in some contexts networks might have more of a maintaining a certain function sort of role, but then how to allow for the pieces to come together. And yeah, I think we were just thinking about that a little bit. It's and what does leadership look like where it maybe comes from the group in that sort of a sense. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing what you're saying really connected to what Judith and Pippa has shared as their conversation, and it's really hard to get those emergent outcomes in an autocratic kind of hierarchical environment. But then if you take that away, you can't take away all of the structure, because then nothing happens. And so how do you do the dance?
Okay. I'm involved with Dave that's here as well, in like a sort of grassroots climate action network of networks building. And the conversation I had with Abby was about different roles, and how people can get involved, and that for some people coming along, they're sort of still trying to get their head around working in distributed ways or across sector, depending on their role. But an insight I had was that we haven't named the sort of network gardener role that we've been taking. So we actually haven't said that that's an option as well. So we're here gardening, and it's a network, and you can join in somewhere, but we've not actually said you could just join in on the gardening too. So that was a big insight I had.
I really appreciate that insight, because it comes up a lot as the invisible work, that sometimes people walk by a garden and they're like, oh, these vegetables just grew themselves. And I think, oh, no, they didn't. Somebody was weeding and somebody was watering, and don't forget about that gardener. So I think that's also can be true in networks.
One of the topics that we touched on that I'm really interested in is, how do you make it sustainable? Because evaluation can take so much effort, and then by the time you get it, how do you then turn that into action? that is, what are those key things to measure, and how do you do it in a sustainable way, and then turn that into action? That to me is the nut to crack, especially in a network context.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, some of the initial answer to that is that the reason that we play with this accessible DIY kind of evaluation for network coordinators is because it is more sustainable to look at these things and collect data that you would be doing largely as part of your job, but maybe not be thinking to write down or to capture. So it's likely happening in the process, and it's just a matter of capture more so than finding an extra, $10,000 to $20,000 to contract somebody from the outside to do something for you. And that's probably necessary when you get to the impact level, because you do want to have that level of rigor and sort of extra bandwidth. But a lot of this is meant for folks like us to be able to do.
I'm wondering, so I have an organization that just went through a very long strategic planning process, like a year long. And in that, we lost a significant portion of our network, I think, because we started questioning our purpose because we were kind of, re-envisioning our mission. And we kind of halted emergent projects as we wanted to make sure they would align with our, next vision. And so it just took us so long, I think, because this is actually the one time in which I was like, I think our distributed network was really not, the distributed nature of our network in that moment was not working for us because we needed to make a decision about where we were going and do it. But so my question is, we lost a significant portion of our network during that transition. And curious about with regrowing it or kind of reaching back out and as we kind of dig into our new purpose, and we don't necessarily have we have a compelling purpose, but the narrative of impact we've had in this space is evolving. And so I'm curious about how to grow and evaluate the network, how to evaluate the health of a regrowing network in a really, as Daniel was saying, in a very everyday sort of way. I'm kind of we've sort of imbalanced the kind of internal work versus external, putting things out into the world. And so we're not in a point where I want to invest a lot in internal evaluation until we start regrouping and getting people excited about doing this external facing work. But just as we regrow, are there things we can do in the little way to kind of track the health and and tailor it and stuff?
I think that might be the perfect segue to this one more slide that I want to show about what you can do with your data, some of this very easy DIY data, and it might be an answer to your question. So if you'll allow, I'm going to transition that way and speak directly from an example. So I think that what you can do to help nurture any network, but especially one that's kind of relaunching, and I have one of those that I'm working with myself, and we're talking about what data are we going to use to help attract more people and really, I guess, fortify that center of gravity at the center. And so one of the things that we want to do is to help people visualize participation, who's here and what are they doing and how are people connected so that the network feels real to people who have been participating sporadically or are just coming in and don't really know what they're a part of. We also want to be able to show the evolution of relationships so that people can see over time, oh, I went from having, a connection with 10 people to deeper connections with those 10 people and another 20 connections with people who are really helping to advance the work that I'm doing. which gets to reflecting value to the network members. So if those intermediate outcomes are what we want to be focused on at the beginning, then you can show how people are gaining value. And this can be as simple as, you don't have to do a whole network survey to get, quick touch points on the participant experience, but you can just ask people. This is one of my favorite things to do at the end of a meeting or at the end of a convening. Raise your hand if you met someone today, if you heard something or learned something that you're going to use today, or there's something that you discovered that you want to learn more about. And just having people look around the room and see all those hands raised will help them see, oh, wow, look at what's happening here. So that can kind of reflect the value back to the members. You can also see how to incorporate this data into your decision making. Well, if people are, having one kind of experience, but not so much the other, then how can you build that into your agendas coming forward into the network so that you're delivering balanced value to people and delivering different kinds of value because different people are coming to your network for different reasons. You can use that data to make the case for funders, for participants, and also to their organizations. Like one of the things that came up in my meeting today was, people want to be here. Their bosses don't necessarily want them to be here. So we have to not only tell a good story to them, but we have to teach them to tell that story about how this network is going to generate value to the person who's asking them to go to a different meeting at the same time that they would otherwise be here. And that's a really different sort of scenario. And then the last one is about improving network communications. So one of the things I often do at the end of meetings is share in the recap. How many people raised their hands to do X, Y, or Z? How many people said they got value from this thing or that thing? So that can help to tell the story incrementally of where the value lies in the network. So yeah, I think that's one of the last things that I wanted to share to kind of bring us full circle. Like, what can you do with this data once you collect it? But I also want to just make space for, before we move towards closing, any other questions, because I really appreciate that question that you asked, Gretchen. A lot of people are in that position. So, what questions are you holding as we walk away? What questions can we hold together as a community trying to advance this practice? Like what's alive for you right now? I know it's a lot.
I'm curious for you as you kind of are developing this model, what for you is the most alive right now? I mean, kind of what are you most excited about in this model that you're working on?
Thank you for asking that question. So, well, it's really new, this kind of key conditions piece. So that's come in the last 6 months. So I'm excited about integrating that and about getting feedback and seeing how it resonates with people. But I think the next layer, so we think about it kind of as a pyramid, and this network evaluation for network coordinators is the bottom. And the top of the pyramid is the impact that the network wants to create. And this middle part, I'm really interested in the middle. And the middle is kind of like, what is happening with the learning, with the narratives, with the ideation and the generativity in the network that is positioning the change in the system? And how do we even conceive of what that is and what it looks like if we're talking about, tracking people's conversations and how they used to say this, that, and the other thing when they talked about this problem or challenge, and now they say something different? Is that what we're tracking? Like, what is it that we're looking for when we start to think about this phenomenon of collective intelligence and seeing or orienting to things differently? So I spend a lot of my Saturday morning coffee and book time with things like that. Appreciate that question. Yeah, what kinds of infrastructure best support the collection of data from everyday network activities? Well, let me see what I can give you. A couple of things. One is a very early version of this work that is the IMM toolkit. So some of this was put into place in partnership with the small foundation that has been, they fund a lot of networks who are working for systems change on the continent of Africa. And we've partnered with them, and they took this and made it into a toolkit. So it's accessible. They said to me this week, it's the single greatest download on their website. So they think that's great. I also want to share with you this dashboard for evaluation. So this is these are the tools, like take them, run with them. We've had a lot of feedback about people being able to use them successfully. So the first page of that suite of spreadsheets, it's view only, so you can make a copy and then go to town and customize however you like. But there's little explanations about how you might do what you might do, and you can get started experimenting right away. And do we have a role around this network health tracking work? Well, the role is part of the network coordination role. And we often talk about this network coordinator. You know, we think of them as the gardener, but we sometimes use the metaphor like a restaurant, like there's a front of house, middle of house, and back of house when it relates to your network. And the front of house is where you're, you know, telling your stories to the world. And the middle of the house is where you're facilitating the engagement of the network. And the back of the house is where you are doing things like collecting data. So I don't know that we have different roles. Some networks or you know, collaborations are big enough that they have a team. And so often there may be one person on the team who's really, you know, into the analytics and doing a lot of that type of work. So it may be one person's role in a larger team, but often it's the coordinator. So one of my other intentions for today is to help you love data a little bit more so that you want to capture it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, one of the challenges that we've had in our network is we had one of the coordinators just, they were tracking a lot of things and a lot of different types of activities. And so they could point to, well, you know, there was more of this year or less of this. But I find that, you know, when you track a lot of different things, then you don't really have that much insight about if things are going better, because there's like a lack of a North Star. And so kind of in the various things that you've kind of identified, you know, measuring these 4 sections, or the 4, looking at the kind of 4 key, you know, you had the 2x2 grid. Do you find that usually an organization should like focus in on one of them, or like how to choose between like what becomes kind of your North Star for like what to work on? Or
well,
any thoughts around that?
Yeah, this is another interesting part about the intersectionality of this, and the way that like network health is a kind of endeavor of wholeness. So if you looked at your body and you were saying, okay, I've got to run a marathon, how healthy am I? Am I ready to run a marathon? Well, you might do a stress test for your heart, and you might look at, you know, your metabolism, and you might look at some other things. But it's because everything is tied together, it's hard to say that you would just choose one. So looking at the intersectionality of, well, if you facilitated your convenings in a particular way to amplify trust, because your participants are saying that they don't feel a sense of belonging and they're not ready to collaborate with other people, what would that look like? How would you change what you're doing to foster trust and belonging in your network? Because that will open up the kind of sharing that facilitates that bigger picture, that then illuminates the opportunities that people might see to coordinate and collaborate with one another. So that's you know, a part of it. But you also might find that, well, the reason that people aren't collaborating or sharing information is because we don't have really strong participant agreements. which is part of collaborative infrastructure. So then you might focus on the participant agreements in your collaborative infrastructure in order to do that. And then, you know, it kind of depends on the nature of what you're seeing, where you might choose to focus. And I was saying in the main room while you all were having your conversations, like that's a nut that we haven't cracked yet. Like Converge hasn't sat down together. Like I think it would be great to have a retreat where that's what we focus on. It's like, if we were going to build an interpretive guide to, if you see this in networks, where do you focus, or what does the data tell you? That's kind of a horizon activity right now. So I think I'm happy for you to call me and email me, and I'd have a chat with you.
I think that's a great way to step into transitioning to the end of our time. Carri, if you could just name for us again, like, what is the best way for people to reach out and connect with you?
I will give you my Converge email address, which is a happy place for me to receive
great
communication from all of y'all. And I just want to say that the network leadership series that we offer, and a lot of the tools, you know, we're really committed to open sourcing pretty much everything that we do. So you can find a lot of things on the website, and yeah, have a look, reach out. This is a real community building effort, I think. So I'm happy to stay in touch.
Thank you for that invitation. And I welcome everyone in our last little minute to leave any words of appreciation, gratitude to Carri in the chat, as I just named that our session close for session 4, the Americas and New Zealand time zones, is happening in about 8 minutes. I will pop the Mighty Networks link in here. Mel and Ants are going to be offering some closing words. There will, of course, be a number of sessions. I think there's some reflection labs left and conversation cafes in the other set of time zones. So if you really just desire to keep going and stay up late or wake up early or whatever it is, you're welcome to do so. Mighty Networks and GatherTown are also staying open for a bit, and Mel and Ants will talk about all of that in the closing of kind of where to, what's happening, how to access things, and all of those good notes. So with that, Carri, thank you so much. Again, this was so rich. You're a masterful facilitator and expert in what you're doing, and it was wonderful to learn from you and with you.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Great. All right. Take care, everyone.